At the end of each session, we will be directing your questions to the speakers. Now, for the keynote address, I would like to invite Dr. Jairam Varadraj, the Managing Director, LG Equipment. Over to you, Dr. Jairam.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's my pleasure to be with all of you this evening. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. So before I commence, under these trying times, I hope you and yours are well and safe. In the context of the topic of this webinar, I would like to step back a little bit and understand what are some of the lessons that we have learned or we are continuing to learn in the presence of this crisis that we are facing. There are plenty of transactional lessons, whether it's the issue with migrant labor, the safety of our employees, how to deal with these kinds of shocks in the future. These are transactional, and I would like to, I'm sure that every one of you is well qualified to deal with them. I would like to talk a little bit about the structural lessons that we have learned. And maybe in that context, you know, there are many structural lessons, but I would like to focus on two of them. One thing that this crisis has presented to us, especially in Indian manufacturing industry, is our dependence on one economy, namely our domestic Indian market. Now, if you had the opportunity to be playing all over the world, then the context and the challenges would have been very different as we go through this crisis. Now, the topic of this seminar is kind of provocative in the sense that it talks about India being self-sufficient, and that's a theme that's been making the rounds in various quarters. I would like to examine this whole concept of self-sufficiency in a slightly broader platform. Now, we've got to be very careful because self-sufficiency is a double-edged sword. Now, wind back to the economic situation in our country post-independence. You know, the whole industrial development of India post-independence was based on the principle of self-sufficiency. Now, we all know that led us down the wrong path. The self-sufficiency was about protecting Indian industry, it was about creating huge entry barriers for others to come and participate. There was the licensing system, which kind of stifled competition. As a consequence, the industry really didn't develop. And more importantly, consumers suffered. Basically, consumers and all of us as manufacturers provided substandard products or dated products. And that was really not good for the country. It was not good for the citizens of this country. And the whole transformation happened in the 90s when India started opening up and dismantled all the licensing system. And you can see the kind of transformation that has happened in the country. And I think when we talk about self-sufficiency, we need to ensure that we don't go back or rewind and go back to the earlier concept of what self-sufficiency was all about. The second thing about self-sufficiency is that, you know, it's about building in the context of self-sufficiency in the current era that we're talking about. It's about building world-class, not necessarily substandard products, but world-class products. Now, to build world-class products, it requires a lot of competence, technology, processes, investment in hardware, engineering, a whole gamut of things that is at a very high standard compared to when you're making products just for the Indian market. Now, if you look at the world today, it's a highly interconnected world. And I think we need to talk about self-sufficiency as a concept within the context of that interconnected world. And we need to be very careful that, you know, the business that we architect in this context is not something that is relevant and that's competitive globally. Now, the second structural lesson that I would like to talk about is the fundamental value proposition of each of our businesses. Now, when you talk about self-sufficiency in the context of being world-class, and it takes a lot of time and effort to build that, there's really no need for us to be self-sufficient by focusing on the Indian market. We need to be talking about global opportunities. And in most of our products, the global opportunity is exponentially higher than the Indian opportunity. Now, in order for us to leverage it, we have to be very careful about how do you build the central value proposition of the business in terms of what is it that is going to make you win. Now, so far, in most of our businesses, we have done a labor arbitrage. It doesn't matter. It's not just IT. In almost all the industries that we operate in India, it's about labor arbitrage. We make products by virtue of low factor costs. We make them cheaper. And therefore, we have been doing business internationally by giving price as the value proposition. Now, that's a window, no doubt. It's a window that's open for us. We should use that window. But I think on our own, we should close that window. I think what we need to do in terms of building that world-class organization is about being able to play in the center of the opportunity globally, not in the periphery where we work with cheaper products or a lower cost product. We need to look at value proposition beyond price. We've got to look at what is the customer's fundamental value proposition. That, of course, it includes price, but it has to be a lot more. Like in our business, the value proposition that we bring to play, it's about energy efficiency. It's about low maintenance costs. It's about environmentally friendly products. And by the way, we also give you a cost competitive solution. So I think we need to shift the needle in terms of what our business fundamentals are towards this. And self-sufficiency for me has to include this larger envelope. Otherwise, we will be doing a huge disservice to ourselves and to the country. Now, in all this change that we are changing the value proposition of the organization from a cost-based or a price-based organization to something that's a much broader spectrum of value to the customer. We need to, one of the biggest transformation is people, right? Now, if you look at the current context of what happened in the crisis, you know, the whole migrant labor issue really brought to the forefront the way we are handling people. Now, people produce at the last mile of the quality of the product, last mile of the reliability of the product. Now, we cannot be using people as a resource. You know, typically when you look at the accounting of people, it is about, you know, you account people as an expense. But we don't look at people as an asset on the balance sheet. And I think that fundamental shift has to happen in order for us to build that world-class organization that enables us, by the way, to also become self-sufficient as a nation. So this big transformation has to happen within our organization, and this is something that we need to really be focused on. And all this takes time. This is not something in the crisis people come and talk about tomorrow we're going to be self-sufficient, whether it's the crisis, the problems with China. All these transformations take time, and it requires committed, diligent, steadfast, you know, conformance to the path that is required to get us there. Now the whole concept of building world class. I mean, you look at people. Look at why all of us go to work. We all go to work because we want to improve our standard of living. And one aspect of standard of living is what we earn. Now, when we build the competitiveness of our individual organizations on the platform of being low cost, by virtue of the fact that we have low labor costs, we are pretty much shooting ourselves in our own foot. So our model of building competence, our model of building self-sufficiency should be founded on the basis that Indians are expensive and Indians are not cheap. Now, how do you build that competencies across the organization where Indians are expensive and we are still competitive and we are able to provide value proposition, and by virtue of that, be a global player, and by virtue of being a global player, we are also self-sufficient as a nation. Now, the whole concept of self-sufficiency needs to be looked at on a much broader platform than a very narrow platform of saying, how can we protect ourselves? How can we create tariff barriers and create a very protective limit? I don't think that's a sustainable thing. Now, in the transformation of manufacturing specifically, I'm not an expert in the specific tools and technologies that one could deploy. And there are eminent speakers that have been listed in this webinar who will be talking about that. But one central thing that has been making the rounds for the last 5 years, and nothing specific to this crisis, is the whole concept of digitization of the organization. And that seems to be a very popular, favorite kind of a term that is bandied around quite frequently. My only caution there is digitization is a tool. It's not an end by itself. We have to be very careful about what are the challenges or what are the opportunities that we want to leverage in our company in the process of building this value proposition to the customer, and where does digital solutions fit into that. And I think it's very important that we focus on the desired outcomes of our business. A digital solution will enable or make it more effective or make it more efficient. So this whole concept of building a self-sufficient nation or a self-sufficient organization cannot be looked at in a very narrow term. It needs to be looked at in a much broader thing about building world-class organizations, a world-class country that competes on the basis of a broad spectrum of value proposition that we can bring to the customer. And it is not centered around Indians remaining cheap and low cost. And that's not consistent with what we want to build or what we should be building as organization and as a country. So I will stop here. This is basically the thoughts that I wanted to share with you in this webinar. I will rely on your questions to clarify thoughts that I may have or you may have. Thank you very much. Again, I wish you well. I wish you to stay safe. And thank you for inviting me for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you for that enlightening session, Dr. Jairam. Indeed, now self-sufficiency needs to be considered as an interconnected concept, and we need to be world-class in the products that we create. And we need to look at value proposition beyond price. So before you take off, I have a couple of questions for you. And my first question to you is India ready for self-sufficiency entirely? What would be your recommendations for the industry and the government?
Well, I'm not, I don't have administrative experience or political experience to advise the government. But, you know, when I look at our own experience when we are building a strategy for the company, we can't boil the ocean. There are tons of opportunities for us as a company, but we can't boil the ocean and try to leverage all of the opportunities at the same time. It's about prioritization, and building a strategy is about discriminated investment in resources and a discriminating focus on what you want to do. So even as a country, I think if we want to be self-sufficient in everything that we consume, I think it would be akin to boiling an ocean. As a country, then we need to take a strategy of what we want to focus on and what we want to build. As an organization, it's about self-sufficiency is about, it's possible. We have the talent, we have the capability, but what we really need to do is start with a very, very strong aspiration that we want to get there. The destination has to be a total commitment to that destination.
Okay. And my next question to you is, how do you keep balance between cash conservation and investments in advanced technology in the current situation?
Well, in the current situation, like you said, is current, right?
Yeah.
You need to navigate this very carefully to ensure that you retain the financial stamina in the company. But the current is not going to be the future. The future is going to be very different. So what you need to do during this time is to ensure that the financial stamina of the company is ensured so that you go into the future very strongly, right? So I don't have a specific answer of how you'll balance the cash between investment and conservation, but that's something that's very contextual to each company. But the end goal should be to preserve the financial stamina for what is to come in the future.
All right. And I have one last question for you. It is, do you think that self-sufficiency is spoken to compete only with China and the imports?
I don't know in what context this was raised, so I can't comment on what was the genesis of this whole principle of self-sufficiency that's doing the popular rounds these days.
Right.
The principle of a nation of our size and with our capability to be able to build a nation that is capable of building products for ourselves and for the world is not something that that is not very far from what we can aspire for. Now, if you look at a country like Japan, when it went through the process of transformation after the Second World War, they had a principle of self-sufficiency. They wanted Japanese companies to make products for the Japanese market, but in the process, they made products for the world, right? That is how they built their competitiveness, and they did it sectorally. They started with something as basic as steel, then they went into consumer electronics, then they went into automotive, they went into shipbuilding. Progressively, they took sectors. The same thing was repeated by the Korean companies after the Korean War in 1950. They did the same thing. They were also the principle was self-sufficiency, but the larger envelope was global competitiveness, to be globally relevant. And they built it sectorally.
Okay, and one more question for you. Your thought seems to reflect an ecosystem approach. So what is an ecosystem that we can tap into for this endeavor, or do we need to need a new one?
I think the organization's ecosystem, you can talk about the ecosystem at the economy level, and, transferring the blame for all our ills to the government, it just absolves you of your own responsibility, right?
Right.
There are enough opportunities within the organization to build an ecosystem that will energize and provide the right platform for each organization to build its competitiveness. I don't see that as a limitation at all. Sure, the social infrastructure, whether it is logistics or whether it's transportation, whether it is the efficiency of the bureaucracy, all this can make things better. But I think if we don't transform internally within the organization, I don't think changes there are going to make a country better.
Okay. Thank you so much for making time out, Dr. Jairam. It was lovely having you with us.
Thank you.
And we would like to have you sometime soon on our next webinar as well.
Thank you so much.
Your session was really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.